Hello there, welcome back to the channel. The human race is plagued with contradictions. On the one hand, one man's hero is another man's villain. Basically, a freedom fighter from one person's perspective can be a terrorist from someone else's. This darkness follows us around. In every human civilization, there is this contradiction. There is what we aspire to be like, better, greater than ourselves, and there's a darkness that sometimes drags us back. And as a species, it's all about finding that balance because it's in us, it's in our nature, and we're not growing past it anytime soon. It's probably never going to happen. So the species, we're always going to have this light and dark. The problem is the people on the dark side don't always realize that they are the dark side. And in every civilization we encounter, we see this duality. It's not to say things are so clean, but sometimes it is pretty obvious. And that's where the Eastern Alliance comes in. If you're not familiar, this is a faction from the original 1970s Battlestar Galactica series Encountered. The quick backstory: the heroes, the colonial fleet, fleeing Cylon tyranny, had encountered these semi-omnipotent, very advanced beings that were possibly non-corporeal or semi-corporeal. It's not entirely clear. They were sort of the inspiration, very likely, to the God and spiritual storyline that was very heavily influencing the modern show, and the subtext of it was scattered all over the 70s series. It's everywhere. These beings represent different things. You've literally got a robot in this thing called Lucifer, for example. These beings, you have a literal representation of Satan, of the actual devil, played by Patrick McGee to great delight, by the way. But spinning off from that, these non-corporeal beings give humans a gift. They tell the colonials where to go. They say, head in this direction, and you will find Earth. They basically tell them the direction. They don't tell them how long it will take them to get there. But this is where Earth is. It lies on this trajectory, on this course. You might arrive in a week, you might arrive in 50 years. We're not going to tell you that. We're not giving you all the answers, but head in this direction. Well, on that journey, they've been running into human colonies all the while. Me personally even saying, why weren't they picking these people up or just choosing to stay with them? But most of those colonies were offshoots on their own, pioneers that had gone forth away from the main 12 colonies of Cobol and had established little outposts, trading posts, mining colonies, agricultural worlds, whatever. And they were scattered everywhere. Most of them weren't even known to the colonies. They were that far out. So they were forgotten, lost, or had been founded by, again, pioneers who hadn't really sought permission for their creation. They'd just gone out and done it. There was also the possibility that some of those colonies may have been stragglers from the 13th tribe that had gone to found the planet they were looking for, known as Earth. Or, as in Geminese, as it was pointed out, is sometimes known as Terra, which matters in this particular context. Well, on this path, well, on this trajectory, they run into a ship that looks remarkably like a NASA space shuttle. Not exactly the same, it's distinct, it's red-colored, engines are a little bit differently arranged, but it's a sublight ship, although it must be still relatively quick because it was able to travel at least interplanetary journeys relatively quickly, or perhaps even interstellar ones definitely within a human lifespan, within a few years. So it must have been traveling relatively quick. If not faster than light, it was traveling at near light speed. But that's just, why did it have to be logically for this to have worked? They find 5 humans in suspended animation aboard the ship. Humans that require a thinner atmosphere than them, 1/5 of theirs, as they determine. A bit of controversy aboard the ship throughout the fleet about whether they should wake them up. Eventually they wake up on their own, and they find it difficult to breathe. So they eventually agree to put them back in the ship and set it on its course, and they follow it, or at least a couple of fighters do, to its destination, which is a remote colony of their people. They keep mentioning a world called Lunar 5, which is some kind of moon settlement near their home world, a planet they refer to as Terra. These people speak language more familiar to us, whereas instead of using things like words like frack and centons and things like that, they use words like minutes, hours, years, and fuck. So their language is more familiar. They're less technologically sophisticated than the colonial fleet, although they do still have lightspeed capability or basic FTL capability. But their forces are far less evolved. Their world is described as once having many different nations that have slowly coalesced into eventually just becoming 2. A sort of Western alliance and an Eastern alliance, which is not remotely lost on me that this is an allegory for the NATO and Warsaw Pact factions of the 1970s on Earth, which it was very clearly inspired by. Quick interjection with an FYI. One of the helmeted guys here who's actually speaking in the episode, you can't see his face, but this is a young, almost blink and you'll miss it unless you recognize his voice, appearance by John Delancey, who would go on to play Q in Star Trek The Next Generation. And considering this episode also revolves around the beings of light, and how we know Q is definitely in My Little Pony playing Discord, because that's clearly the same person, I'm going with the Q now exists in this universe, but that's just a cool little factoid I liked when I noticed it, and I thought that is John Delancey when I heard him speak. And then he's in the end credits. There we go. And everything down to the uniforms that the Eastern Coalition were, the Eastern Alliance were. The Eastern Alliance, by the way, being the bad guys. And that's who we are talking about, because the bad guys are always the fun ones, aren't they? These people were fleeing them, even though they're from the West. It turns out that Earth itself, or Terra, in this case, actually has a similar atmosphere to the colonies, so they'll breathe the same. But because they've been creating these other colonies on worlds with thinner atmospheres, some humans have adapted to breathe these thinner atmospheres. That explains that away. They realize that Terra would be perfectly fine for them. The problem is Terra is divided and on the verge of some kind of nuclear Armageddon, with these two sides right at each other's throats. But the Western powers are looking for a peaceful way to resolve it. The Eastern Alliance have been wiping out colonies and massacring them, bombing cities from orbit, all kinds of things. And this kind of brutality had forced the West into a sort of capitulative state. They wanted to end it. They wanted to negotiate a peace by any means necessary. The Eastern Alliance was going to exploit this and destroy them, and as well as at the same time get rid of their own surplus population, while the ones they actually wanted to survive it would be buried underground because they're evil, because of course, why not? And as part of this process, they'd already been exterminating various colony worlds off-world. So the world that they'd initially gone, these original settlers, Michael and Sarah, as they were known, by the way, they also have more human names, more Earth names, indicating very strongly that this world is a straggler settlement from Earth, from the 13th tribe. It's not actually the 13th tribe. It is, but it's not the bulk of it. Probably just a few of them that stayed on this world for whatever, and they became these people who drive cars and are less advanced and use language more familiar to us. It's all meant to deceive us into thinking this actually is Earth that they're finding, but it's not, ultimately. And the god beings again intervene, and they want to stop, they want to prevent the war because they're actually benevolent. Is a short version. It's its own story, but they basically don't want these humans to destroy themselves. So they want the colonials to prevent it. So they help the colonials infiltrate the world and disable or stop the sort of the bad guy faction, the Eastern Coalition, and try and unify these people into a single power, into a single people as they should be. Because even the people who are oppressed on the Eastern Alliance, they don't want that. They don't want everyone to die. They don't want to die themselves. So they're quite a fascinating people. Their uniforms are very Soviet or very 1930s Germany-esque, very Gestapo or KGB-esque tactics in the way that they operate. They believe in the superiority of their people, that they are not only the greatest military power in the whole galaxy, which they're clearly not, because the Galactica could wipe the floor with their entire navy on its own. They're that much less advanced, and their ships are so much smaller. Their vessels are quite interesting. We'll get to them in just a moment, but Galactica does manage to capture a few of them, because it captures one of the destroyers after it arrives at the colony where the settlers had come to try and escape them. The destroyers had already bombed that planet from orbit with viral or possibly neutron-based weapons, which had killed most of the human settlers on the world. This was to leave the buildings and infrastructure intact so they could repopulate it. Basically, they wanted everyone that was on the Western Alliance side to be wiped out. They didn't want to enslave them, conquer them, nothing. They just wanted to kill them all. Just completely genocide them and then get rid of their own degenerate population and only have the most pure, the most superior of their kind to survive. It's all very familiar, isn't it? And that was their plan. They'd already sort of, again, probably virus bombed this world with only a few survivors. They considered those survivors unimportant, so they weren't going out of their way to go and carry on destroying them or even stopping a few refugee ships from arriving there. It's probably something they figured they can either conquer them or enslave them later or whatever. But then they encounter Galactica. Galactica is then quite easily able, well, just a couple of their fighters are easily able to overwhelm the ship, capture it, they bring it back to Galactica, and the entire crew are imprisoned. They eventually escape with the help of Baltar, But that's when the colonials go to the world and they do take their steps to prevent them. On their ships, they're, as I said, much smaller, less powerful than the ones used by the colonials. They do have energy weapons and other things, but they're far less powerful again than the ones used by the colonials. Their ships can actually fit in the docking bays aboard Galactica. These are their big, heavy cruisers. They're big, powerful warships, and Galactica is just like a little more than a heavily armed shuttle to us, and your weapons can't even harm our defenses. You probably can't even breach our hull. That's how inferior they were. But they refer to themselves as human. They're not as familiar with COBOL and stuff like that, but they have heard their world referred to as Earth before, which again is part of the whole deception. But their people are, particularly the Eastern ones, are far more aggressive, but the Western are really much better. But they're so desperate for capitulation that they want peace at any cost. And these people are going to exploit that. They've built up this massive armada, this massive navy, and they're just going to bomb the hell out of the other side and then use their ships to blanket and prevent any of them escaping the world in case they try. But they have this arrogant superiority about them that they believe, despite all the evidence presented in front of them, that they are not the master race, that they are not the superior ones, that they are not the greatest military power in the whole galaxy. Despite being presented with that evidence, they still arrogantly stand fast with their beliefs, saying that yes, your ship is very powerful, but it's only one Battlestar. You only have one. And like wolves taking down a bear, we will swarm it. And Adama doesn't understand that reference because he doesn't know what a wolf or a bear is, which again is a strong indication that these are humans of Earth rather than not. It is eventually determined, to loop the story here, that this is not the Earth they are looking for. This is Terra. It is not the planet. They carry on because this world's got a lot of healing to do, and quite frankly, they don't want anything to do with it. They're still looking for Earth itself. So they move on, they leave this planet behind. There may have been plans to bring it back in the future, but hopefully, with the Eastern Alliance being defeated and their plans not working, the world actually would evolve into a unified, central, single government, much like the colonies, and set down the path to become a better civilization, just as these other benevolent, alien-esque creatures wanted, and it set the colonials on a course to do. But the Eastern Alliance, if left to its own devices, would have annihilated the entire population of their enemy, as well as a good portion of their own. You're talking about a genocide of potentially up to 75% of their population, and that's just a guess as to how many they're actually planning to have survive. But it goes to show, again, that the darkness follows us everywhere. Baltar is a great example of a dark, unpleasant, nasty figure of a human being who comes from the colonies. He was so self-serving to the point that he was quite happy to have his entire race either subjugated under him, or when that didn't work, simply have them all exterminated. Kill them all, fine, as long as I live. It's a level of cowardice and ego that it's rarely seen. This is a man who would literally allow the entire genocide of his entire race as long as he survived. But there we go. The Eastern Alliance of the original Battlestar Galactica series. A very cool antagonist. From the point of view of the colonials, no better than the Cylons. The only difference being they weren't the only power. Terra was divided into two hemispheres, two powers. And both of them were creating their own off-world colonies. Just the Eastern Alliance, being so much more belligerent, were militarily stronger than the West. Again, the analogy just writes itself, doesn't it? But they were considered such a threat, so evil, that the colonials wanted nothing to do with them. They just keep on going. But they are forced into a position of actually having to intervene and stop the destruction of their world, and eventually usher in this new era of peace. Just like any human, there's potential, but that darkness is always going to be with them. What they try to do to themselves, because it is to themselves, because we're all human, or in their cases, all Eastern and Western human. But we are at the end of this video. If you enjoyed it, please like, share, and subscribe. Tell me your thoughts on the original 1970s Battlestar Galactica series. Do you prefer it over the reimagined? Because factions like this actually add a layer of depth to the human story that sometimes actually, on a bigger scale, the original Battlestar sometimes didn't have. Many things that it did really well. But actually, this is one of the better fleshed out stories from the 70s. And it also comes with a moral tale, which, as a huge Star Trek fan, I particularly appreciate. It's just kind of cool. So what do you think of them? And we're at the end of the video. If you enjoyed it, I'm glad. Bye-bye.